I smoothed down the fabric of my navy blue dress, trying to make sure there were no visible wrinkles. It was one of those outfits that felt just right for the occasion, a family dinner. Not too fancy, but not too casual either. Emily would have a fit if I looked like I was trying too hard, but I needed to look presentable. I was 77, and, let's be honest, I'd stopped chasing trends years ago. But I always made sure I didn't look like I'd given up. David said dinner would start at 7 o'clock. I had plenty of time before I had to leave, an hour, to be exact. So I sat back in my armchair, and let my eyes wander around the living room. Everywhere I looked, I saw memories. Pictures on the walls, each one a snapshot of the past that I clung to, sometimes a little too tightly. There was the one of Henry and me on our golden wedding anniversary. I could still feel his warm hand in mine, the way his eyes would crinkle when he smiled. Then there was one of David when he was little, holding a fishing rod, beaming with pride, the first fish he ever caught. He had always been so excited about the smallest things. That innocence, that joy in the simple moments, had faded so quickly. And there, right by the door, was the picture of Ethan and Sophia at their graduation. I didn't need to see their names to know which one was which. Sophia had that quiet confidence, and Ethan, well, Ethan had always been the more rambunctious one. The family seemed perfect, back then. Simpler times. Times I'd give anything to go back to. I couldn't help it. My eyes lingered on Henry's photo. It had been 15 years since he passed, but I still found myself asking, what would he say right now? What would he do? Henry always knew how to set boundaries, even with David. He'd always had this way of putting his foot down, making sure nobody took advantage of him, or of us. And me? Well, I never quite figured that out. I just gave and gave, until there was nothing left to give. The phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen, a message from David. I put on my glasses, squinting a little at the screen. I was waiting for him to clarify something. Maybe he was asking if I needed help getting to their new house, though I couldn't remember him offering help in the last few years. Mom, I'm sorry, but we won't make it tonight. Emily's hosting a dinner for her coworkers. We'll reschedule for another day. I read the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. My mind wasn't catching up. David had called yesterday, said I had to be there. He insisted. He even mentioned something about a special announcement. I reread the message. What was going on? Why the sudden change? My phone buzzed again. Another message, but this one wasn't from David. It couldn't be. I checked the sender again. His name. His number. But these words were so cold, so harsh. You weren't invited to dinner. My wife doesn't want you there. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands started shaking. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't possible. This wasn't David. This couldn't be him, not my son. But there it was. His words. His phone. It was all real. I sank back into the chair, still holding the phone in my hand. I couldn't let go. If I did, I thought, it might all disappear. It felt like the last tie to reality, that last connection I had with my son, and now, it was slipping away. I thought about all the years, the memories, the things I had done for him, for his family. All of it seemed meaningless now. The images came rushing back. Little David, holding onto my skirt on his first day of kindergarten. Teenage David, awkwardly asking me for advice on girls, his face turning red. Grown-up David, standing there so proud, introducing Emily to me. He was so happy. And now this message. Cold, indifferent, like it didn't matter anymore. Was this sudden? Or had they just been pretending all along? How many times had they talked about me behind closed doors? How many times had they smiled at me, only for that smile to be fake? How many times had they forced themselves to invite me? The questions kept spinning in my mind. I couldn't stop them. I looked over at a brochure lying on the table, a glossy picture of the River Ridge Estates apartments. David and Emily's new home. A 3-story townhouse. A view of the river. A private dock. I stared at it for a moment, the realization sinking in. 6 months ago, I'd made a $120,000 down payment on that house. For them. "Mom, it's an investment in the future," David had said, all eager. "A place for family gatherings. Your corner will be too." I laughed bitterly. My corner. Was that a joke? Apparently, that corner had disappeared, long before the house was even finished. I still remember the day David and I were sitting at the bank, the air thick with tension. The manager kept looking at me with poorly concealed surprise as I signed the paperwork. He couldn't hide it, the disbelief in his eyes, like he was waiting for me to change my mind. "Are you sure, Mrs. Parker?" he asked, his voice barely covering the doubt. "It's quite a substantial amount." I didn't hesitate, even for a second. "I'm sure," I said firmly. My hands didn't shake as I signed. Henry had left me enough to help our son. Enough to support him and his family, if that's what they truly needed. It felt like the right thing to do. I'd done this before, and each time, it felt justified. After all, I was just doing my part. It was supposed to be a family. A team. A unit. We were supposed to be in this together. Since then, there had been other investments too. I had helped David with a new car, safer for when he traveled with the kids. Something reliable for his family. A new life, a new beginning, a car that should have brought some peace of mind. I paid for Ethan's private school. I knew it wasn't easy for him, not with the challenges he faced. But I didn't want him to suffer. Marissa had worked hard, always pushing herself to provide for the family. So when she wanted to remodel the kitchen, I paid for that too. She deserved it, I told myself. She deserved a comfortable space to cook, to gather, to be proud of. Every time I wrote a check, every time I pulled out my checkbook, it felt right. It felt like I was doing the right thing for the family. For them. I didn't question it. They needed it, so I provided it. No hesitation. No second thoughts. But what did I get in return? Rare phone calls. Formal visits during the holidays. And now, this text. This cold, emotionless text from David. I hadn't heard from him in days. Weeks, maybe. And now, this. I stood up slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. My legs felt a little unsteady, but I walked over to the secretary that had belonged to my mother. The one I'd kept all these years, now sitting in the corner of my living room, its faded wood a reminder of a time long gone. I opened the top right-hand drawer, the drawer that held the memories, the receipts, the evidence of everything I had given over the years. Neatly arranged. Organized. My world of finance, tucked inside. The folder labeled David was the thickest of them all. I opened it. The pages were filled with checks, bank statements, bills, proof of everything I'd done for him, for his family. There was a check for $20,000, given to David to start a business. A business he abandoned after only 6 months. How many businesses had he started? How many dreams had he abandoned? Then, there were the receipts for Emily's continuing education courses. She wanted to grow, wanted to be better for the family, and I couldn't refuse. There was a bill for roof repairs on their old house, another reminder of what I had paid for. And then, of course, Toby's car insurance. Always something. Always someone. Every bill I had covered. Every need I had fulfilled. How many things had I paid for over the years? How many times had I helped, rescued, supported, and yet here I was, cut off from the very people I had worked so hard to keep happy. What was the point? To be shut out from a house I paid for? To be ignored, excluded, shut out? Was this what I'd earned for everything I had done for them? I stared at the folder, my chest tightening with a mixture of frustration, confusion, and hurt. I had given them so much. So much of myself. So much of my money. But now? Now, I was the one left out. Not even a phone call. Not even an invitation to dinner. The silence was deafening. The phone vibrated again. I didn't want to look, but I did. It was a message from someone else. Someone I hadn't expected. Sophia. Grandma, are you coming over today? I missed you, she had written, her words simple, but heartfelt. Sophia had always been different. From the moment she was born, I could feel her sincerity. She had never treated me like a second thought. Even when David and Emily were too busy, too caught up in their lives to make time for me, Sophia would check in. She'd stop by, she'd call, she'd ask how I was doing. She was the only one who truly seemed to care. I could feel a knot in my throat as I read her words. I paused before I typed my reply, unsure of what to say. How much should I tell her? How much of the truth could I lay at her feet? I didn't want to burden her with the weight of my heartbreak. So I typed slowly, carefully. Honey, it looks like your parents have decided it's best for me to stay home. I hit send, and sat back, feeling a strange emptiness in my chest. A few seconds later, the message came through. What? Why? Daddy said yesterday that you absolutely had to be. I stared at the screen. My heart broke all over again. Sophia didn't know. She didn't understand. She had no idea what was really going on. I imagined her, standing in that new house. Looking around at everything. The house I had paid for. The house that was supposed to bring us all together. The house that now stood as a monument to all my sacrifices, all my efforts, all my giving. And now, nothing. I set the phone down and looked at the folder again, my mind racing. All these years, I had convinced myself that I was buying their love, their attention. I thought if I gave enough, if I showed them how much I cared, they'd appreciate me. They'd respect me. But instead, all I was really doing was renting their time. Their affection. And now, it was clear, the lease had expired. I couldn't help but feel the bitterness settle in. All those years of giving, of sacrificing for my family, and this was what I got in return. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling, as I dialed the bank's number. A polite voice answered. Good evening, Fayetteville Community Bank. How may I assist you? I tried to steady my breathing. Good evening. My name is Alice Parker. I'd like to consult about some regular payments from my account. Of course, Mrs. Parker. I'll need to ask you a few questions to confirm your identity. I answered the questions one by one, my mind elsewhere. My thoughts kept drifting back to David, to the family, to all the things I had done, and all the things I had expected in return. A simple phone call. A visit. Respect. Once the questions were finished, the woman on the other end spoke again. Thank you for confirming, Mrs. Parker. How can I assist you today? I want to cancel all automatic payments and transfers from all of my accounts. Every single one, I said, my voice steady, but the weight of it hitting me with every word. There was a brief pause. All payments, Mrs. Parker? You have quite a few. Yes, all of them, I said. And I also need to revoke the power of attorney I gave to my son, David Parker. I see, she said softly. This is a major change. Perhaps you should come to the bank in person for a more detailed discussion. I didn't need to think twice. I'll come down tomorrow to sign the necessary documents. But I need this process to start today. Is that possible? Another pause. Yes, we can temporarily suspend all payments until your visit, but we'll need your signature for a full reversal. Great, I said. Suspend everything, right now. While the woman typed something on her computer, I looked up at Henry's picture. I felt a wave of emotion, a rush of memories. He'd always known what to say. What to do. He would have known how to handle this. He would have known how to set a boundary with David. You were right, Henry, I thought. You can't let people sit on your neck, even if they are your own children. Ready, Mrs. Parker? The bank assistant's voice broke my thoughts, pulling me back to the present moment. I nodded, still lost in my own emotions, but now focused on the task ahead. Temporary suspension activated, she said after a pause, her tone businesslike. You have a total of, she hesitated for a moment, 174 regular payments and transfers, all of which are blocked until your visit to the branch. I couldn't believe it. 174. 174 different ways I had been supporting David and his family. Each payment, each transfer, a thread binding me to them. But not anymore. Thank you, I said, my voice steady, despite the emotional weight that seemed to press down on my chest. I'll be there tomorrow when it opens. The phone call ended, and I sat in silence for a few moments, the realization sinking in deeper. A strange sense of relief washed over me. Like the weight of a heavy backpack I hadn't even realized I was carrying, had suddenly been lifted. For the first time in years. I wasn't thinking about anyone else's needs but my own. It was like breathing again, the air finally clearing. My phone vibrated again, David. I knew exactly what had happened. Sophia must have said something to him. But I didn't bother answering. Instead, I composed a brief message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then typed. Then pay your own way. Hey freeloaders. My finger froze over the send button. Was I really ready to do this? To turn the page completely? To destroy the fragile peace I had maintained for so long, built on my money and patience? But hadn't they been the first to break it? Hadn't they been the ones to destroy that peace by denying me even the simplest respect? It was all becoming so clear now. They'd decided I was no longer needed. Not even in the house I had paid for. I pressed send, then turned the phone off. The silence that followed felt different, though. Not the quiet of solitude I had become used to, but a quiet that was liberating. For the first time in ages, I had done something, not for David or Emily or anyone else, but for myself. And it felt good. It felt right. I walked over to the closet and pulled out an old photo album. As I flipped through the pages, I saw snapshots of my life. My wedding to Henry, so full of hope and love. David's birth, my first taste of motherhood. Family vacations, smiles frozen in time. But as I turned the pages, something hit me. Somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. I had melted into the needs of others, putting myself second, third, sometimes not even on the list. I had forgotten my own desires, my own dignity, my own worth. Henry always said to me, Alice, don't let anyone take you for granted. Even on his deathbed, he made me promise him something, to take care of myself as I had always taken care of others. I hadn't kept that promise, until now. I finally had the strength to keep it. I closed the album and placed it back on the shelf, a symbolic gesture of letting go. I took off the dress I had planned to wear for dinner, the one I'd put on for them, for that night. Instead, I changed into my house dress, the one I wore when I was alone. Comfortable. Unpretentious. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the right choice. I made myself a cup of tea, the warmth of the mug grounding me in this new reality. Then I reached for the book I had been meaning to read for months, but had never had the time to open. The constant demands of family had always come first. But not anymore. Now, it was my time. Tomorrow would be a new day. A fresh start. No more financial shackles. No more being held hostage by people who didn't value me, my help, or my love. 174 receipts. 174 reasons to move on. To leave that past behind. I sipped my tea and opened the book, feeling the warmth of freedom, freedom of choice, freedom to live for myself. The phone stayed off. And for the first time in a long time, my heart was steady. Calm. I hadn't felt this peace in years. The next morning, I was up before the sun. The Fayetteville Community Bank opened at 9 a.m., but I was there 20 minutes before, my heart filled with determination. For the first time in ages, I had a sense of purpose, a sense of control. I had slept well the night before, the first night in a long time without the aid of sleeping pills. I felt stronger, more in charge of my life than I had in years. When the doors opened, I was the first in line. The young woman behind the counter greeted me with a friendly smile. "Good morning. Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to see Mrs. Carter," I replied, my voice firm, confident. Linda Carter had been with the bank for nearly 30 years. She was the one Henry and I had trusted for all our financial matters. A familiar face. Someone I knew well. A few minutes later, I was sitting in Linda's office. She hadn't changed much over the years. Her gray hair was still neatly combed, her glasses still thin-rimmed, but her eyes, those eyes, were always so attentive, so present. "Alice, it's good to see you," she said, shaking my hand warmly. "I was informed about the call yesterday. All 174 payments have been suspended, as you requested. Is everything okay?" I looked her straight in the eye, no hesitation. "I want to cancel them all. Forever. And I need to cut off David's access to my accounts." Linda took off her glasses, wiped them with a tissue, a gesture I'd always noticed when she was deep in thought. "Alice, we've known each other for years. Are you sure? This is a rather radical decision." "I'm absolutely sure," I said, my voice unwavering. She nodded, typing something into her computer. "That's good. I'll prepare all the necessary documents. It'll take some time, you do have a lot of automatic payments." As she worked, I couldn't help but glance at the thick folder she placed in front of me. It was filled with printouts of all my transactions for the last year, each one a reminder of what I'd been paying for, what I'd been enabling. The first receipt I saw was for the monthly mortgage payment on David and Emily's new house, $3,800. I remembered the day David brought me to see the house, the gleam in his eyes, the hope in his voice. "Mom, this is the perfect place for our family, and for you. There's a guest room with a private bath on the first floor. You won't have to climb any stairs." A guest room I had never stayed in. A guest room that had now been closed off to me. The next receipt was for the insurance on Emily's car, $850, paid quarterly. She'd told me it was necessary for her work, that it was the only car that would get her the clients she needed. I kept flipping through the receipts. Memberships to country clubs. Payments for private dental clinics, because Ethan had special dental needs. And then, there was Rebecca's college tuition, the one thing I didn't regret paying for. Each receipt brought back a memory, a conversation. A request. Sometimes, even the tears. "Mom, we're so tight on funds right now." "Grandmother, this is the latest model. Without it, I'll be a white crow." "Edith, you don't want your grandson to suffer from complexes, do you?" Receipt after receipt. Each one, a reminder of my naivety. My willingness to give. And, their greed. "Here's the paperwork to cancel all payments," Linda's voice brought me back to reality. "And the power of attorney revocation form. Please read it carefully and sign it if you agree." I picked up the pen and signed, without a second thought. The decision had been made. It wasn't radical. It was necessary. Linda lowered her voice, sensing my resolve. "If you need any help, any advice, I'm here for you." I smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. "Linda, everything is really okay." As I walked out of the bank, I felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. A burden I hadn't realized I'd been carrying, for years. The sense of relief was almost overwhelming. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe a little easier. The silence around me was different now. No longer filled with the constant hum of obligations, of responsibilities that weren't truly appreciated. My next stop was my lawyer's office. Charles Davis had been working with our family for years. I'd known him since Henry was still around. His graying beard had grown longer over the years, his glasses thicker, but that sly gleam in his eyes remained unchanged. He was one of those men who could sense when you were about to make a big decision, a man who had seen it all, or so he liked to think. "Mrs. Parker, what a pleasant surprise," he said, as he pointed to the chair in front of his desk. "What can I do for you today?" I took a breath and sat down, my decision clear in my mind. "I want to change my will," I said calmly, "and set up a lifetime trust to protect my assets." Charles raised an eyebrow, his expression becoming more serious. "May I ask what prompted this decision?" His voice was soft, but I could hear the curiosity beneath it. "Family circumstances have changed," I said, not wanting to get into the details. "There was no need. I need to know how I can legally and safely manage my finances, without interference from my son or his family." He nodded, without pressing further. "There are several options we can explore. Let's go over them one by one." We spent the next hour talking through the options: irrevocable trusts, financial power of attorney, and provisions in my will. Charles made notes, explaining the intricacies of each option, but for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt like I was in control of my life. These decisions weren't being made for me. I was making them, for me. When we were finished, I glanced down at my phone. There were 15 missed calls from David, 7 from Emily, and 3 from Ethan. No messages from Sophia. Charles walked me to the door, his voice warm and understanding. "Should I have the paperwork ready by the end of the week?" he asked, offering me a final look of reassurance. "The sooner, the better," I replied. "And Charles, thank you." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You know, Alice, Henry always said you were stronger than you looked." I'm glad to see he was right. I smiled faintly as I walked out of his office. Henry always saw right through me. He knew I had more strength than I gave myself credit for. He knew I could handle things. And finally, I was starting to believe that for myself. I didn't need to go straight home. On the way back, I stopped by the supermarket. It was the first time in ages I hadn't been rushing to get groceries for David and Emily, or picking up Ethan's favorite snacks, or worrying about what David would want for dinner. This time, I was shopping for myself. I didn't think about anyone else's preferences or needs. It felt strange, but good. It felt like freedom. When I got home, there was a surprise waiting for me. Sophia was sitting on the porch, her arms wrapped around her knees. She jumped up when she saw my car, a smile lighting up her face. "Grandma," she called, rushing over to help me with the bags. "I've been calling you all day. Why didn't you answer?" I looked at her carefully. Sophia looked so much like me when I was younger, the same brown hair, the same stubborn little wrinkles between her brows when she was worried about something. "I've had a busy day, dear," I said, opening the door. "Come inside and tell me what happened." We went into the kitchen, and Sophia sat down at the table, nervously tapping her fingers on the countertop. I started sorting through the groceries, trying to keep my mind focused on the task at hand. "Grandma, what's going on?" she asked, her voice soft. "Dad's in a panic. He says you've blocked all payments and won't answer your phone." I calmly took out the kettle, setting it on the stove. "It's true," I said, looking at her directly. "I've decided to cut off your family's financial support." Sophia's eyes widened in shock. "But why?" Her voice shook a little. I reached for my phone and showed her the message from David. Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she read it. "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know. I swear. It's awful." I nodded slowly. "Rebecca's right. For years, I've paid for everything, from your house to Ethan's tennis lessons. And all that time, I felt like I was being used. Yesterday, I got confirmation." Sophia sat silently for a moment, her eyes downcast. She seemed lost in thought, processing everything. Finally, she looked up at me. You know, she said quietly, I've always seen it, how they take advantage of your kindness. Especially Mom. I tried to talk to Dad, but he always defended her. I smiled softly. Deep down, I always knew Sophia understood more than she let on. She was smart. She saw things clearly, even when others couldn't. What's going to happen now? She asked, still hesitant. I mean, they have a lot of payments to make. Loans, mortgages. They'll have to manage on their own. I shrugged, unbothered. They're adults. They have good jobs. David's a building inspector. Your mother's a successful realtor. They'll be fine. The phone on the desk vibrated again. David. I muted it without even thinking. Aren't you going to answer it? Sophia asked, her voice quiet. Not today, I replied, shaking my head. I need time to think. And he needs time to understand the consequences of what he's done. Sophia looked at me thoughtfully. You know, Grandma. I've never seen you so determined. I smiled weakly, the words feeling foreign to me. I hadn't seen myself like this in years. We finished our tea in peaceful silence. And when Sophia was about to leave, she hugged me tighter than usual. Are you okay? You sure you don't want me to stay? I'm perfectly fine, dear, I reassured her, gently stroking her cheek. Go on, and don't worry about me. She nodded, but paused at the door. I'm not taking sides in this conflict, Grandma. You understand that, don't you? Of course I do, I said with a small smile. This is between me and your parents. It has nothing to do with you. After she left, the house felt still again. Quiet. I checked the mail, and there it was. A notice about a failed charge on Ethan's credit card. That fast. It seemed my grandson was already living up to his credit limit. I set the letter aside and sat down by the window, staring out at the quiet street. My phone kept buzzing with incoming calls and messages. But I didn't feel the need to check. Instead, I pulled out an old photo album and opened it to a random page. There it was, a picture from 20 years ago. Henry and I, young and in love, smiling alongside David and Emily, with little Ethan and Sophia on a picnic. Everyone was smiling. When did things change? When did support become an obligation? When did love stop being unconditional, and turn into an expectation of financial assistance? I closed the album and walked over to the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me looked tired, worn out, even, but there was something new in her eyes. A strength. A determination I hadn't seen in years. Time to remember who you are, Alice Parker, I said to my reflection. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. My heart skipped a beat. Was it David? I went to the door and peered through the peephole. Marlene Hughes, an old friend, stood there with a basket in her hands. Alice, she exclaimed, wrapping me in a warm hug the moment I opened the door. I called but you didn't answer. I thought I'd drop by and make sure you're okay. Come in, Marlene, I said, stepping aside. Sorry, I turned my phone off. Just a little family emergency. She set the basket on the table, homemade cookies and a jar of jam. Family problems? Marlene asked, eyeing me carefully. Emily again? Marlene had never held back her opinions on Emily. She called her a predator, and in many ways, she was right. I quickly recounted what had happened, what I had decided. Marlene listened without interrupting. When I was done, she took my hand. At last, she sighed, so relieved I couldn't help but smile. I'm sorry, Alice, she continued, but I've watched them take advantage of you for years. How many times did I want to say enough? But it was none of my business. I know, I sighed. You were right all along. I just didn't want to see. So what now? Marlene asked, pouring us tea. David must be panicking by now. Let him panic, I shrugged. I need time to sort out my feelings. And they need time to realize what they've lost. We spent the evening talking, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a mother or a grandmother. I just felt like a woman talking to a friend. It was liberating. By the time Marlene left, the sky was dark. I decided to check my phone. 37 missed calls. 23 messages. I started reading through them, wrinkling my nose at the desperate, pleading tone that seemed to grow with each message. The last text from David came just 10 minutes ago. "Mom, I'm on my way to see you. We need to talk." My muscles tensed, a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Was I really ready for this conversation? Could I stand my ground without giving in? But there didn't seem to be a choice. He was on his way. And the confrontation I had been avoiding for so long was inevitable. I turned off the light in the living room, the darkness of the room mirroring the uncertainty I was feeling. I walked into the kitchen, the sound of my footsteps echoing as I moved toward the familiar routine. Putting the kettle on. Preparing tea. I took out my best cup, the one I only used on special occasions. Today was a special occasion, after all. The day Alice Parker finally said no. I heard a car pull up outside, its engine idling for a moment before cutting off. I looked out the window. It was David, alone. No Emily. That, in itself, was strange. Usually, she controlled all the important conversations, the ones that mattered, the ones that needed her firm hand to guide the narrative. But today? Today was different. The doorbell rang, and I could feel the weight of it. It wasn't just a doorbell. It was the signal that everything was about to change. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the door. David stood on the doorstep, looking disheveled. His normally neat shirt wrinkled, his face a mix of irritation and panic. This wasn't the son I had known. This wasn't the man who had always seemed so confident. I silently stepped aside, wordlessly inviting him in. "Mom, what's going on?" He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "All the payments have been rejected. The bank says you've revoked all the authorizations. We can't pay the mortgage." I kept my voice calm, almost detached, as I went into the kitchen. The kettle was boiling now, the steam rising in gentle spirals. "Do you want tea?" I asked, taking out a second cup. "What tea?" David asked, throwing his hands up in despair. "Do you realize what's going on? The bank called about the late payment. Emily's hysterical." I poured the boiling water into the teapot and turned to face my son. "I understand," I said slowly, feeling the coolness of my own words. "I've canceled all financial obligations to your family. All 174 payments. I have no intention of resuming them." David froze. His eyes widened in disbelief, as though he couldn't wrap his mind around what I was saying. "What? Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. He slumped back in his chair, unable to process it. "Is this some kind of joke?" I shook my head. "You weren't invited to dinner," I said quietly, my eyes locking onto his. "That was a message from you, David. Not a joke." And my response wasn't a joke either. He paled, lowering his head, a sense of shame washing over him. This isn't what you think," he started, but I didn't let him finish. "What am I supposed to think?" I said, my voice rising just slightly. "That my own son kicked me out of the house I paid for? That my daughter-in-law doesn't want me at their table, even though I funded their lifestyle?" I put a cup of tea in front of him, but he didn't even look at it. He just sat there, staring at the table. "Mom, it was stupid. I admit it. I shouldn't have written it. Emily was upset, and you decided to make her happy by insulting your mother?" I finished his sentence for him, my words sharp and cold. David didn't know what to say. He just stared at me, as if waiting for me to cave, to take it all back. That's very sweet, David, I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. What a lovely son you are. Mom, please, he said, the pleading tone in his voice unmistakable. We can't do this without your help. We have the mortgage. The loans. Ethan needs to pay for college. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the warmth calm me down. But inside, a fire was burning. The anger that had been building for years was finally breaking through. Didn't you think about that when you denied me even basic respect? I asked, my voice steady but firm. When Emily criticized my clothes? When Ethan missed my birthdays? When you didn't even call me on the anniversary of my father's death? David looked ashamed. I could see the guilt written all over his face, but there was also a flicker of irritation in his eyes. That same irritation he had always carried with him, the one he never knew how to hide. He was always a bad actor. Mom, we appreciate everything you do for us, he said, his words stumbling over each other. We do. It's just that sometimes. He trailed off, searching for the right words. Sometimes there are misunderstandings. We love you, Mom. Even Emily. Even though she doesn't always show it. I looked at my son. The grown man in front of me. A father of two, who still looked like a little boy trying to get away with something. My heart broke a little at the sight of him. But I held my ground. David, I don't believe you, I said quietly, my voice firm but low. I don't believe you love me. You love my money, my help, my willingness to solve your problems. But you don't love me. That's not true. David jumped up from his chair, his hands clenched in fists. How can you say that? Because it's true, I said calmly, never rising from my seat. When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling? Inquired about my life? Invited me over, for no reason? Not when you needed money, or help with the kids. David opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. I continued. Your father always said you can't buy love. I didn't listen. I thought if I was generous enough, helpful enough, you'd appreciate me. I was wrong. Mom, David said, taking a step toward me, I understand you're upset. Why don't you let Emily and I come over this weekend? We can talk things over calmly. No, I said, shaking my head. I don't need to. My decision is final. David's face twisted in panic, his voice rising again. But how are we going to pay for the house? He asked. The cars, Ethan's tuition? You have a good job, David. So does Emily. You're adults. You can handle it, I said. David's face contorted with frustration and anger. You can't do this to us. His voice rose. After everything we've. I stood up too, my own frustration bubbling over. What have you done for me, David? Name one thing you've done for me, unselfishly, expecting nothing in return. David went silent, his mind racing. I could see it in his eyes, the desperation to come up with something, anything. But he had nothing. See? I sighed. You can't even think of one example. David stepped back, his expression shifting from frustration to embarrassment. It's not fair, he muttered. You're embarrassing me, he added, his voice awkward and uncertain. I grinned, a bitter laugh escaping me. What kind of embarrassment did you put me in, David? By turning down a house, and a family dinner? David ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit I remembered well from his teenage years. It was a mistake, Mom. I've already apologized. What do you want me to do, get on my knees? I want you to leave, I replied, my voice calm but firm. I need time to think. When I'm ready to talk, I'll let you know. But Mom, David started. Go, I said softly, but with resolve. Please. He stared at me for a few seconds, his face a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door slam shut, and then the engine of his car roar to life. Only when the sound of his car faded into the distance did I allow myself to sit down and exhale. My hands were trembling. Confronting my son had been harder than I expected. Part of me, the old part of me, wanted to run after him. Tell him I would give it all back, just to stop the anger. Just to make him happy. But I didn't. I stayed where I was. I let him go. Instead, I finished the tea that had gone cold, and started washing the dishes. Needing to keep my hands busy. To calm my mind. The phone rang again, Emily. I rejected the call without a second thought. A minute later, a message from her appeared on the screen. Alice, we need to talk. David told me about your conversation. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Let's talk things out like adults. I couldn't help it. I grinned. Like adults, that was Emily's favorite phrase. It was always her way of trying to show her superiority, her control over every situation. I didn't respond. The next morning was quieter. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like the world was pressing down on me. I took my time getting ready. It felt like the first real day of freedom I'd had in ages. There was no urgency, no one's needs to be attended to, no expectations to meet. But there was something I had to do today. Something important. My attorney, Charles Davis, had come by earlier with the paperwork I needed to sign, a new will and trust deed. It was time to solidify the changes I'd made to protect myself and my assets. It's all ready, Alice, Charles said as he laid the papers out in front of me. As we discussed, the bulk of the estate goes into an irrevocable trust, with you as the sole beneficiary during your lifetime. Upon your death, the assets will be distributed according to your instructions, 40% to Sophia, 10% to a library support charity, and the rest to your discretion. I carefully went through the documents. I didn't rush, even though I had a sense of finality about this. This wasn't just a change in legal paperwork. It was a change in everything. I felt a strange sense of peace as I signed each page. David and Ethan would receive the minimum required by law. Emily? She received nothing. That's right, I said, my voice firm, as I signed the last sheet. Charles watched me closely, a slight smile playing on his lips. You know, Alice, in 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen such drastic changes in a will. Usually, people hesitate, doubt, they wait. I've hesitated enough already, Charles, I said, signing the final document. This wasn't just about money, it was about regaining my life, my dignity. Charles nodded, understanding the weight of my decision. He gathered up the papers, his expression softened by respect. I'll file these today and send you the copies by the end of the week. And Alice, if you need any help with potential conflicts down the line, I'm here for you. I stood up, ready to leave, feeling strangely lighter. Thank you, Charles. I'll be in touch if I need anything. After he left, I felt a tug. A pull towards something else, something simple. I needed to clear my mind. I decided to take a walk. The weather was clear, the sun was soft, and I could feel the cool breeze against my skin as I headed toward the park. I found a bench and sat down, taking in the sound of children laughing as they played. A little boy was building a sandcastle, his mother patiently helping him as the tower they'd made collapsed, only for them to start all over again. The mother laughed along with him, sharing in his joy. I watched them, remembering. I remembered when David was that young. When Henry and I had taken him to the park, and I had helped him build his first sandcastle. That joy, that simple moment of being together, when had it all disappeared? I sat there for what felt like an hour, watching strangers, remembering my past. And then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out a notebook from my purse, the same old, leather-bound one Henry gave me on our 40th anniversary, and I began to write. I didn't know where the words were going, but they came. Not poems. Not letters. Just thoughts. Pieces of myself I had buried under years of servitude, guilt, and silence. I am not a wallet, I wrote. I am not an obligation. I am not a burden, or a bargaining chip. I am a woman. I am a mother. I am a friend. I am, still here. A tear slipped down my cheek, but this time, it wasn't from sadness. It was release. I closed the notebook and stared up at the sky. The clouds moved gently, like a lullaby. The breeze carried with it the scent of roses from the nearby garden beds. Life was moving. And for once, I wasn't trying to catch up. I was in it. When I returned home that afternoon, I found a letter on my doorstep. A real letter, not a bill, not a printed notice. But an envelope, hand-addressed. I opened it slowly. It was from Sophia. Her handwriting was neat, careful, the way mine used to be when I was her age. Dear Grandma. I know things are hard right now. I know everyone's upset, and I don't know how to fix it. But I want you to know. I love you. Not for your money. Not for the things you've given us. But because you are strong, and wise, and funny, and kind. Because you're you. If you ever want to come to my apartment, we can have tea and talk about art like we used to. Just us. No drama. No noise. I miss you. Love, Sophia. I pressed the letter to my chest, my eyes closing, letting the warmth of her words soak into my heart. In a sea of betrayal, she was the one island I could still swim to. I made a mental note. Buy something nice for Sophia. Not because she asked. But because she didn't. That evening, I lit a candle in Henry's memory. I used to do it every Sunday, but somehow, I had stopped. Stopped honoring the man who taught me to love with boundaries. Who reminded me that giving wasn't about being drained, but about sharing. As the flame flickered, I whispered aloud. I did it, Henry. I finally took my life back. And in the silence that followed, I imagined his voice, gentle, proud. It's about time, Alice. The next morning, I woke up to a sense of stillness, not the kind that feels lonely, but the kind that feels earned. I made myself breakfast, 2 eggs, toast, a little jam. I sat at the table, not in a rush, not thinking about anyone else's schedule. Just me, and the morning. The sun peeked through the kitchen window, catching on the edge of my teacup like a tiny diamond. It was the kind of quiet that most people don't notice. But I did. Because for the first time in years, I was truly aware. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the community center. A woman named Julia had heard I used to run art therapy classes with Henry back in the day. She asked if I'd be interested in volunteering again, just a few hours a week. I said yes, before I even thought about it. It felt right. It felt like a bridge, back to a version of myself I hadn't seen in so long. The Alice who painted. The Alice who taught. The Alice who helped others not because they demanded it, but because they needed it, with gratitude in their eyes. I pulled out my old paintbrushes that evening, dust-covered, but still intact. Some of the bristles were stiff, but most had held on. I smiled. They were just like me. I set up my easel in the guest bedroom, the one that used to be a storage room for Ethan's unused gaming gear and Emily's off-season shoes. I cleared it all out. Donated every last item. And for the first time, that room felt like mine. I stood there for a moment, paintbrush in hand, and whispered. You're home now. When I touched the canvas, it felt like an old friend. One I hadn't spoken to in decades. But it welcomed me, without judgment. The first stroke was awkward, hesitant. The second, more fluid. By the third, I remembered. I painted until the light outside disappeared. And when I stepped back to look at what I'd created, I didn't care if it was good or not. It was honest. It was mine. That night, I wrote another entry in my notebook. I am still here. I am not lost. I am not too old. I am not past my purpose. I am still learning how to love myself. I closed the notebook with a soft smile. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel used. I didn't feel tired. I felt whole. And that, in itself, was everything. 2 days later, I received a letter from Ethan. I was surprised, not just because he had written to me, but because it was handwritten, no emojis, no abbreviations, no digital shortcuts. Dear Grandma, I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know how much you were doing for us until Dad told me what happened. I thought all the nice things we had were just normal. I didn't realize they were all because of you. I've been a jerk. I know that. And I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but I wanted to say thank you. For everything. And I hope someday you can forgive me. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And it was the first real sign of remorse I had seen from him, maybe ever. I folded the letter carefully and placed it next to Sophia's on the mantel. 2 small seeds of hope, planted in the ashes of everything I thought I had lost. I didn't write back. Not yet. Some things need time. That evening, I took another walk, this time to the lake Henry used to love. He called it his quiet place. We'd spent countless evenings there, watching the ducks glide across the water, listening to the wind rustle through the reeds. As I stood on the edge of the water, I felt the weight of everything settle into place. Not like a burden, but like bricks in a foundation. Solid. Steady. Mine. I whispered to the wind. I'm going to be okay, Henry. I miss you, but I'm going to be okay. A gust blew through the trees, soft, sudden, like a breath. I smiled. On the way home, I passed a group of neighborhood children playing hopscotch on the sidewalk. One of them, a little girl with red braids, looked up and waved. Hi, Miss Parker, she called. Hi there. I replied, waving back. Her joy was simple. Uncomplicated. It reminded me that life still had room for joy, even after all this time. When I got home, I made myself dinner, not a rushed, sad dinner, but a real one. I lit a candle, turned on some soft music, and sat at the table like I used to when Henry was alive. And for the first time in years, I didn't eat in silence. I ate with peace. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, if David would call again, if Emily would try to guilt me, if more apologies would arrive in my mailbox. But I knew one thing for certain. I had found myself again. Not the mother. Not the provider. Not the forgotten one. Just Alice. And she was finally ready to live. A week passed, quietly, peacefully. No calls from David. No dramatic texts from Emily. No surprise visits or emotional blackmail. Just silence. And in that silence, I healed. I went to the community center twice. The second time, I helped a teenage girl named Brianna paint her first canvas. She had come in with her arms crossed, defensive, withdrawn, and left beaming, paint smudged across her cheek and hope glowing in her eyes. That was the kind of giving I missed. Not the kind that drained me. The kind that filled me back up. Sophia came by on Sunday. She brought flowers, lilies, my favorite, and a little tin of her homemade chocolate cookies. We didn't talk about her parents. We didn't need to. We painted together, side by side, like we used to before everything got complicated. You're smiling more, she said softly, dipping her brush in pale blue. I like seeing you like this. I looked at her, the granddaughter who had always seen me as more than what I gave. Me too, I replied, my voice steady. I like me like this. When she left that evening, she kissed my cheek and said, "Don't let them pull you back in. Not unless they've truly changed." I nodded. I wouldn't. I couldn't. The next morning, I received an email from the bank, a security alert. Apparently, someone had tried to access one of my old accounts. The one David used to manage. I called Linda immediately. "Don't worry, Alice," she said, her tone calm but firm. "We've locked everything down. Your new trust is airtight. They can't touch a single penny." I sighed, not with fear, but with resolve. It was confirmation of what I already knew. They weren't sorry. They were desperate. And that was no longer my problem. Later that afternoon, I received another letter. This one from Emily. It wasn't as kind as Ethan's, or as heartfelt as Sophia's. It was cold, carefully worded, the kind of letter someone writes with legal advice close by. "Alice, we are disappointed and confused by your recent actions. After all we've done for you, this betrayal is deeply hurtful. I hope you reconsider before this causes permanent damage to our family." I folded the letter neatly. Didn't rip it. Didn't burn it. I just filed it away, under a folder labeled closure. And then I picked up my brush. Because I had a painting to finish. By the time I finished that painting, a soft, ocean-hued landscape with a single tree standing tall in the middle, I realized something. It wasn't about art. Not really. It was about healing. It was about standing. Alone. Rooted. Still beautiful. I hung the canvas in my hallway. Right where everyone who entered would see it. Right where I would see it, every morning. A quiet reminder. You didn't break. That night, I sat in bed with a book, one Henry used to love. I didn't get past the first few pages. Because I found myself thinking. Not about David. Not about Emily. Not even about the money. But about time. How much of it I had left. How I wanted to spend it. And who I was without the noise of everyone else's needs. The truth? I liked the quiet. I liked the space. I liked me. And that realization, was everything. The next day, I sent Sophia a message. "Tea this Friday? I'll make the lemon scones you love." She replied within seconds. "I'll be there early, I miss you already." I smiled. Yes. There would still be love in my life. But only the kind that didn't come with strings. Only the kind that filled my cup, not emptied it. Later that afternoon, I got a message from Linda, my banker. "Just wanted to let you know your account restructuring is complete. You're officially the only one with access. Everything's protected." And I breathed, really breathed, for what felt like the first time in years. I stepped out onto the porch with my tea, no phone in my hand, no pressure waiting. Just the wind. The birds. The scent of summer blooming through the trees. This was my peace. This was my power. And I wasn't giving it up again. Friday came, warm, golden, slow. I wore my favorite cardigan, soft blue, the one with the stitched flowers along the cuffs. Not because I wanted to impress anyone. But because it made me feel good. Comfortable. Whole. Sophia arrived just after noon, carrying a little bouquet of daisies and her sketchpad. She hugged me tight, her arms lingering around my shoulders like she didn't want to let go. "I've been looking forward to this all week," she said, smiling. "So have I," I replied, and I meant it. We sat in the kitchen, sipping tea, eating lemon scones still warm from the oven. She flipped open her sketchpad and showed me a drawing, an abstract mix of color and emotion. It looked like freedom. It looked like us. "You're talented," I told her, gently brushing a crumb off her cheek. "You know that, right?" She blushed, just like she did when she was little. We didn't talk about David. We didn't talk about Emily. We didn't need to. What was broken, could stay broken. This moment was whole. After lunch, we went out to the garden. I'd started tending it again, pruning the roses, pulling the weeds, planting lavender where Henry used to say, "We need more color." Sophia sat beside me on the stone bench, sketching the tulips. I watched her, the sun catching her cheekbones, her eyes narrowed in quiet focus. "You remind me of myself at your age," I said suddenly, the words slipping out. She paused, looked up at me with that soft, knowing smile. "I hope I grow into someone even half as strong as you." My throat tightened. "You already are," I whispered. That night, after she left, I sat by the window again. No TV. No noise. Just the soft hum of life outside. And I realized. This was no longer the ending of my story. It wasn't the chapter where everything fell apart. It was the part where I finally began again. Not as a mother. Not as a caregiver. Not as a silent, invisible shadow behind someone else's life. But as Alice Parker. 77 years old. Independent. Creative. Loved. Not by all. But by enough. And most importantly. Finally, by herself. A few days later, I received a voicemail. It was David. "Hi, Mom. I'm not calling to argue. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not about the money, or the dinner, or any of that. I'm sorry for forgetting who you are." There was a long pause. Then his voice softened. "Sophia told me you're painting again. That you seem lighter. I guess I never realized how much weight we were putting on you." Another pause. "Anyway, I hope you're okay. I won't bother you again, unless you want me to." Click. No begging. No manipulation. Just a voice. My son's voice. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to call him back. But I heard him. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like his mother. I felt like his equal. Later that evening, I walked through my house, slowly, taking it all in. The walls were still filled with memories, but they no longer felt heavy. The photos, the books, the old tea towels. They were just pieces of a life well lived, not chains to the past. I sat at the piano, the one I hadn't touched in years. It was a little out of tune, but my fingers remembered. I played Henry's favorite song, halting, imperfect, but real. And as the notes filled the air, I felt him there. Not in grief, not in absence, but in presence. A soft warmth, like an arm around my shoulder. Like a whisper. "You did it, Alice. You made it." I closed my eyes, letting the music linger. Not as a goodbye, but as a beginning. Because life wasn't over. Not even close. And whatever came next, I was ready. Spring arrived, quietly, gently. The trees wore soft green crowns again. Birdsong returned to the mornings. And the breeze, once cold and biting, now felt like a welcome visitor. I opened the windows every day. Let the air fill the rooms. Let life back in. I started teaching at the community center every Thursday. Small classes, women my age, some even older. We painted stories, not landscapes. Pain. Joy. Second chances. There was laughter in those rooms. Tears too. But mostly, there was healing. One of the ladies, Miriam, said something that stayed with me. "You don't really lose yourself all at once. It happens in tiny pieces. But when you find yourself again, oh, it's like sunlight after a storm." I smiled when she said that. Because I knew. One morning, Sophia arrived with a surprise, a framed copy of my ocean painting. She had made prints and sold a few at a local gallery. People loved it, she said, eyes shining. They asked who the artist was. I laughed softly. "And what did you tell them?" She grinned. "I told them, it's Alice Parker. She's just getting started." We hung the original in the art room at the center. A symbol of growth. Of roots. Of standing alone, and still thriving. That evening, I lit one last candle for Henry. Not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Thank you, I whispered. For the life we had. For the strength you gave me. For believing I could do this, even when I didn't. And then, I blew the candle out. Letting the smoke curl upward, like a final bow. As I sat on my porch that night, wrapped in my blue cardigan, a mug of chamomile in hand, I watched the stars blink quietly into the sky. No noise. No chaos. No need to fix anyone else's mess. Just me. My story hadn't ended when they tried to erase me. It hadn't ended when they left me out. It had just begun. The moment I chose myself. So, if you're listening. If you've ever felt forgotten. Invisible. Tired. Let me remind you, gently, but firmly. You are not done. You are not too late. And you are not alone. Because somewhere out there, another woman is lighting her own candle. Reclaiming her name. And beginning, again. Just like I did. Just like I always will.